So what we want to present to you today is a compilation of a variety of allocations that have come into the district over the past year and a half since the onset of the public health emergency. The most recent, of course, is the American Rescue Plan funding, also known as SR3. And as we walk through this, I'm going to share with you the amount of money that's come in, what the intended purposes and uses are for that money, and then how we want to reach out to the various stakeholders to use these funds in advancement of education for our students and for our community. So I'm going to walk through this. If you have any questions, please feel free to unmute and just ask them. I'm happy to stop and answer them as we move forward. So to give you a background, there were three different allocations that came from the federal government through acts of Congress to the state of New Mexico. The very first one that came on the onset of the pandemic was SR1, also known as the CARES Act, in March of 2020. The state of New Mexico received just over $108 million, of which they allocated $1,600,000 to Grand Cibola County schools. These funds have to be exhausted by September 30th, 2022. Then at the end of December in 2020, we also received the CARES funds, Coronavirus Response Act, and SR2, where the state received $435 million, almost $436 million, of which they allocated just under $6.4 million to the school district. These funds have to be exhausted by 2023. And then we learned this month that we also received an additional allocation, SR3, known as the American Rescue Plan. The state received $979 million, of which the coming to the district now is just over $14 million. So these funds have to be expended by 2024. So we have SR1, the CARES Act, $1.6 million, SR2, the CARES Act, $6.3 million, and SR3, the American Rescue Plan, $14 million. Altogether, these funds total $22,088,055 that are coming directly to the school district for an additional funding. And just to give you some perspective on where this falls in our total overall budget. On a normal year, the school budget is just about between $76 and $78 million with our operating fund as well as our federal funds that come in and some other funds that come in. It's about $78 million. The state allocates to us in our regular state equalization guarantee that comes from taxes that we normally receive for operations, about $46 million. So as you can see, this is a significant portion of the overall budget. When we add the ESSER funds into our budget, this year will be just about $92 million. So a significant amount of money influxing into the district, and along with it comes a significant amount of responsibility and careful thoughtfulness and strategic thinking about how we want to use this. That's why we want to reach out to the stakeholders and ask for input on how to best use these funds so that we make sure that we incorporate and embrace all kinds of ideas moving forward. So in the CARES Act, the SR1, which was that $1.6 million back in May of 2020, most of that money, much of it has already been allocated because we had to use it primarily to furnish personal protective equipment, respond to the emerging pandemic by creating a safe environment for staff and students. It required us to make upgrades to the building and everything from building safety, air handling systems, scanners for temperatures, modifying our entrance and exits to the building, establishing protocols, just everything that was related to responding in a rapid fashion to the pandemic, as well as spending a fair amount of the resources and investing in technology. So we worked really hard to get a device in the hands of every student. We also wanted to make sure that we equipped the teachers, whether they were teaching remotely or hybrid or in the classroom, depending on where we were in terms of the pandemic levels. So we invested heavily in these big smart boards, much like what those of you who are in person are reading or watching this presentation. We also had to invest in a number of some software and then building an infrastructure in order to support all of this as we rolled out an immense amount of technology and the demand in technology. So that's what we focused on there. And then also training teachers to be able to and equip them to be able to manage and maneuver in this remote learning platform. The Carissa Act and SR2, which was at $6.4 million, we have yet to really allocate most of that. We have done some, and our initial opening salvo in terms of programming and what we want to use that for is using it in outreach. And I say outreach, I'm talking about reaching out to the students who have left our district for one reason or another. This was a statewide and nationwide issue with districts losing students right and left. And I will share with you that on any given day last year, our student population vacillated up and down. And there were times when we actually counted a loss of about 438 students, or 450 students. And out of our normal population of 3,350 students, that's a lot of students to lose. And so we wanted to make sure that we put some resources and effort into going out and bringing those students back in, finding out what is prohibiting them or preventing them from being part of the normal school learning environment again. Whether it was their home life or just they didn't have access to technology, whatever it was, Mr. Perez really wanted to put some effort into making that outreach effort to go and get those students and recover them back so that they could once again rejoin and begin the learning journey again. We invested in technology. We also wanted to focus on career and technical education. That's what CTE stands for, programming. And something we learned along the way, along this journey in the pandemic and maneuvering and navigating, was that this whole epidemic took a toll not only on our students, where they were, fear and unknown how to navigate through the education, but also through our staff. And we really want now to focus on how we're going to address staff health, that both physically, emotionally, mentally, and as well as giving them the tools and the equipment to cope with how this pandemic has now altered their normal life, both personally and in the workplace. But as a responsible employer, we really wanted to reach out to our staff and begin to offer coping mechanisms and programs and really begin to just share and care how much we care for these staff, and by giving more effort to our staff health. Along with that, we want to focus on culturally relevant linguistic education, CRLE, that's what that stands for. And this really has to do a lot with taking our curriculum and our methods of teaching and just in really looking at our entire culture of our organization and how we extend out to both families and to students, and embracing all cultures and modifying our maybe curriculum or approaches to learning so that all cultures have an equal amount of opportunity to embrace and learn from what we're doing. And this is a new training for all of us on how to relate to different cultures, how to relate to staff at different cultures, and all of that. So that's really an important area of focus that we wanted to put some of this SR2 money towards. And then there's this Yazzie Martinez compliance that Mr. Perez mentioned. Yazzie Martinez, for those of you who don't know, is the two families, the Yazzie family and the Martinez family, both joined together and sued the state of New Mexico. And their basic premise, their argument was that the state of New Mexico was not living up to its constitutional responsibility and by not providing enough resources to school districts and not providing the caliber and quality of education to students. And they really began to push that all students in all areas require a high caliber learning opportunity, and that the state had to put more money and more resources and give the districts more opportunity and more resources and shore it up so that they could actually move out of 49th place in the U.S. and move forward with learning opportunities. And so the courts agreed with them. After several years, the courts agreed with them and said, yes, the state must respond to this. And they came out with a number of recommendations / requirements for the state as well as for the district. As we were following this ruling before it became official, it was really the wishes of our superintendent that we start now. We didn't have to wait for that compliance or those regulations to come down, that we really wanted to build our infrastructure now and address these needs ahead of the curve so that we could come out of the gate once we got any additional funding moving forward and implementing as fast as we could. This is a huge undertaking for the district. It's all of these things I'm mentioning here are very significant undertakings for the district and require a fair amount of planning and thoughtful implementation. Included in these SR2 funds are also some more building improvements and safety and developing some academic strategies for producing in this new learning landscape. So in the SR3 allocation requirements, the federal government and Congress, when they allocated this and they gave it to the states, they made one huge requirement in terms of the allocation. So the American Rescue Plan Act requires that the local education agencies, that's the school districts, that they reserve 20% of their allocation towards what's noted here as learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. And they offer some ideas in here, such as summer learning or summer enrichment programs, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, things like that. But as we are discovering that there's really, even though there's some help here, that we really are breaking new ground in terms of identifying what learning loss really is or how to move forward with this. And I think that as we begin to work through this, we're going to discover what that definition means for this district and how we want to approach that. And in addition to that, the state and the federal government want us to really understand and address the academic, social, and emotional needs and see what kind of disproportionate impact that the pandemic had on emotionally disadvantaged students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, and you can see the rest there. And I will submit to you that once I read this here, I will say that when I read this here, this was really, if you take a 10,000-foot view of our community, this very well describes what we are living here in Grants and Cibola County. So it was a significant amount of money towards those strategies, and it is requiring us to respond accordingly. So here are the priorities that are set forth. There's many priorities, but I sort of grouped them in three buckets or three areas of focus. As you can see, the SR3 priorities on the left over here, they pretty much mirror the same regulations and recommendations that came out of the Yazzie Martinez ruling, really looking at-risk students and using much of these funds to focus on at-risk students and interventions. So these are the major subgroups here. The underrepresented student subgroups here, and I will define that later as we move on in programming. Addressing the needs of students with disabilities. The pandemic had a particularly a more severe impact on that population of students because they weren't able to get. Like, I'll just give you a couple of examples. Some of these students require physical and occupational therapy and speech therapy. They weren't able to get that one-on-one with someone in person. All of this had to be done remotely. And coming from healthcare myself, I can tell you that remote healthcare is not the same as when you're having face-to-face type of therapies. And so we really want to see what the impact was on the students with disabilities and then come up with strategies to mitigate those issues for them. And then one big one also is the student equity through collaboration and consultation. That's one of the reasons why you're in the room today, because as a stakeholder and key stakeholder for us, whether you're in education or in business or as a parent, we all have a role to play in how we're going to move forward with collaborating on what the educational needs and how to deliver education to our students and how to really help them succeed moving forward, and also through the pipelining education. And that's why we need your help. And because of this collaboration, we can extend that to all cultures and all ethnic and racial groups, so that everyone receives the same opportunity to flourish and to learn in this new learning environment. So how does that funding work? Here's how the SR3 funding works. So they're going to allocate 2/3 of the funding first. And as you can see here, because of the 20% requirement of allocation, that's going to be $1.8 million to address this learning loss issues. And the other 80% can be used for the other American Rescue Plan items. And then later on, we'll receive 1/3 of the allocation remaining. And the way this is going to work is that the government and both federal and state agency are going to require us to report back to them on how well things are working, okay? And they're going to ask us for particular metrics and what did we use and what was our program plan like and where did we implement that and what were the things that we learned, because they really want to, number one, they want to see that we're using these resources as they intended to do that. And number two, I think they're really gathering ideas on best practices. And I believe that with your help and with other ideas that are coming forth, that we'll be one of those districts that are going to be emerging with some of these best practices that other districts can learn from what we put in practice. So altogether, we're going to have this 2/3 here first, and then later on, we'll have this 1/3 altogether divided up in this manner. So there are important milestones related to this funding, and they're not necessarily in sequence necessarily, but this very first one we have to have by tomorrow, which we've already completed. We had to submit our plan for a safe return to in-person instruction. And earlier today, I participated in a training session with the state, and they really drove home the point that they really want to see in the fall in-person instruction, and that's safe, and providing whatever we have to do as a district and as a community to provide safe in-person instruction back in the fall. So we don't have a whole lot of time, but this particular plan was due tomorrow. It's already been submitted, so we're good on that one. The second one is addressing the learning loss through evidence-based strategies and tactics, and much of that is yet to be defined, and I think that as we move through this process, those items will become clearer for us, and we'll begin to identify, maybe not addressing loss, but how do we address identifying where students are now and then moving them forward. And then the third one is this coordination of resources. Again, one big reason why you're in the room today is because we are seeking ways to really move in a new direction, a new paradigm on how we're going to coordinate resources with other partners in the community. So we can together as an education community can really make breakthroughs in how we coordinate services and resources. And then the fourth one is this relevant assessment developing assessments throughout the pipeline that will help us to gauge how well our new teaching strategies are affecting students, how well we are continually aligning to the standards, and how well we're training teachers to navigate in this new environment, and how well the students are responding, and are we making lots of progress. And so we have to develop those assessments along the way so that we can continually tweak and move and change what we're doing if we have to, but make adjustments along the way for the betterment of the students. A couple more slides. So here's our next steps. We're scheduling in this first round 19 feedback sessions with various stakeholders. We're going to ask you in just a few minutes to, whether you're online or in person, to go to our link, which Dr. Martin will put. If you're online, the link will appear in your chat, so you can just click it and then begin this survey. We're going to gather some data that's used to help us develop proposed uses for the funds. Then we want to come back to you at a later date, probably within 30 or 40, 50 days or so, to present this proposal back to you, say, based on your feedback and ideas are part of this funding source, here's our proposal for what we want to do in developing our program and academic plans. And then we need to implement. As I said, time is of the essence in terms of what we want to do, because we need to have by winter a good solid plan that we're implementing and then being able to measure. And then we want to come back to you the third time and check in with stakeholders and say, here's what we put in place. Here's the metrics that we use to determine how well we're doing. Here's some adjustments. What do you think so far? All right. So those are the next steps in terms of this overall plan. And here's the next steps for you. We need your help to log into the survey link, right? And we're going to do that now in just a couple of minutes. So if you don't have a laptop in front of you, they can distribute one now. And if you have not yet seen the link for the survey, please go to that chat and look at that. And what we're going to do is spend a few minutes after I open it up for questions from you regarding the presentation. We're going to spend a few minutes in the survey.